Hello everyone, my name is Rachel and welcome to my cozy corner. We are finally in the month of February, so I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up today. Thank God January is over. It was cold and snowy and dreary and gloomy, and finally we have a 60-degree day where it's sunny outside, and it improves my mood 1,000-fold. So I'm going to cover all of the books that I read in January. I read 4 books in total, which is honestly pretty good for me since I'm very slow at reading. I think I was already reading 3 of the books, so that kind of helps bump up the amount of books that I read. The first book I finished in January was Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I read this for my family book club that I have with my grandma, my aunt, my mom, and my sister-in-law, and this was my pick for November and December. I thought it would be a perfect book for the holidays since a lot of it is set during Christmas time, and I feel like it's the perfect Christmassy book. I picked this because I've seen the 1994 movie and the 2018 movie, but haven't ever read Little Women. So I thought it'd be the perfect pick for different generations to read a classic. And it was a really great time. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I listened to this primarily on audiobook, which it was an 18-hour audiobook. It was really long. So it took me a while to get through because it was so long, but it was a great time. I highly recommend the audiobook to listen to this book because it was fantastic. So this is about the March sisters and the family dynamics that go into their father goes off to war and they have to keep the household going with their mom. It follows them throughout childhood into adulthood and everything that they go through, from relationships to hardships to having their dad gone at war to poverty, to everything that goes into that. So they meet their neighbor Laurie and they meet his grandfather as well, and he joins in right in their shenanigans, and him and Joe spark a really close friendship, and that delves into more feelings. I will forever root for Joe and Laurie. Even when I was a kid, I always wanted them to be together. Spoiler, obviously they don't end up together and he ends up with Amy, which I don't fully understand. I don't really get their relationship. It's just not something that I think works, but Joe and Laurie are always the ones that I'm rooting for in this book, even though she ends up with somebody else, which he compliments her pretty well, but I can't help but root for Joe and Laurie, which I feel like my mom and my aunt and my grandma all agreed with as well. I think my sister-in-law agreed with that as well. Joe and Laurie, they should be together. Why, Louisa May Alcott, did you not have them together? Anyway, I really enjoyed this story. It was very long. It's put into part 1 and part 2. I primarily enjoyed part 1 the most, when they are growing up and all the shenanigans the sister gets into, you know, Amy burning Joe's book when she's mad at her, and the ball, and burning their hair off with the curling iron, all of the fun little things. Oh, and their plays that they put on for everybody. It's just a really great classic, and I see myself reading this in the future as well, and I would really like to read this to my daughter sometime. I think she would like it farther in the future as well. Hopefully we can read it together at some point, even though it's a hefty book. So that's the first book I read for this month. I gave it 4 stars. I feel like maybe because it was so long and so drawn out that I docked a star, but I still really enjoyed it. The second book that I read is The Women by Kristen Hanna. I had already listened to about 60% of this book already, but my library loan expired, so I didn't get it back until January. And let me tell you, I really loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It was an incredible listen. I highly recommend the audiobook if you want to read The Women by Kristen Hanna. It is extremely informational, it is heartbreaking, and I cried multiple times in this book because of all the struggles that Frankie goes through. Frankie is a 20-year-old girl in the 1970s. Her brother goes off to the Vietnam War and ends up being killed there, and she ends up wanting to go into the military as well and ends up being a nurse in the army in Vietnam, and everything that she goes through there, she is kind of just thrown into the chaos of the war. And then she comes back home after spending 2 tours there, I think, and she ends up getting PTSD and all of the struggles that she goes through while being home after the war and people not recognizing that women were in the Vietnam War. It is incredibly heartbreaking, and everything that she goes through with her PTSD is heartbreaking. People don't recognize that PTSD is a thing in the 1970s. It is not a diagnosable thing yet. They start figuring that out because of the soldiers from that. So she has sleep issues. You know, 4th of July was an awful time for her because of the fireworks. It still is for people. So I highly recommend reading it. It was a really great read, even though it had very heavy topics in it. But I still really enjoyed it, and I recommended it to my mom as well, and she's going to be reading it soon too. The third book that I read in January was Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. I had read Two Dark Windows last year, at the end of last year, and then I had already been into Two Twisted Crowns when January came. I think I was maybe 20%. I honestly cannot remember how far I was into it, but I was a little bit into it. So I read that in the middle of January. I gave it 4.5 stars. I think I gave One Dark Window 4 stars. I really enjoyed the world of the Shepherd King duology. I think that's what it's called. It is a very interesting world. It has basically a mist that is through the kingdom that makes people crazy, and you have providence cards that gives people magic, but it only has a limitation, so you can only use it until you get some ailment or some degeneration from these cards, so you can't use them all the time or else bad things are going to happen to you. It follows Elspeth, and her power is basically that she has a nightmare or a monster in her head, and we kind of follow different perspectives in Two Dark Crowns. We follow about 4 different perspectives from the people in Two Dark Windows. It was a great read. Elm and Ione was my favorite part of the book. I loved their relationship in that book. The way she uses one of the cards, and she's stuck with that card because somebody she's engaged to basically hides that card, so she cannot stop using it. So she feels basically nothing. She has no emotions. And she only feels basically some form of lust, and it goes from there with Elm and Ione and how their relationship develops. He has feelings for her, but she can't really have strong feelings for him because the Providence card that she's using makes her have no feelings. So it's very interesting. I really love their relationship. Elspeth and God, what's his name? Raven. Elspeth and Raven were the other couple in One Dark Window, and it kind of develops in Two Twisted Crowns, but it primarily focuses on Elm and Ione's relationship. So I kind of liked theirs more than Elspeth and Raven's. Let me know if anybody else feels the same way, because I honestly just want a book with Elm and Ione in it, and that's it. But I really enjoyed this series. I highly recommend it if you enjoy fantasy romance. It primarily focuses on the fantasy element more than the romance, but the inklings of romance really made it for me. So highly recommend that book. And the fourth and final book that I read for this month was Then She Was Gone. I finished it literally on January 31st. I was like, I gotta finish this in January. I can do it. It is another audiobook that I listen to. I really enjoy thrillers on audiobooks, which is what this book is. It's a thriller mystery. I primarily view it as a mystery. There wasn't very many thrilling parts in this book, but it follows Lori, and her daughter Ellie goes missing, and they don't find her until 10 years later. It kind of follows the family dynamics between her and her husband and the person that she meets and ends up in a relationship with, and Ellie's disappearance. As a mom of a little girl, it was heartbreaking listening to Lori's perspective of this, and whenever they find her and everything that she goes through is devastating. I genuinely cannot imagine having to go through that. Even though this is a fiction book, it still happens in real life. Kids go missing all the time, and it's heartbreaking. It stuck in my mind that whole night, just thinking about what Lori was going through and her emotions toward that and the nightmares that she has and everything like that. I genuinely cannot imagine. It's awful to me to think about my little girl going through something like that. But it was still a really good book. I gave it 4 stars. I think because it wasn't very thrilling and I had guessed the twist. It gives you little like snippets of, you know, the clues or whatever, but you kind of figure out what is going to happen. It kind of lays it all out, so it wasn't very much of a thriller for me as much as like a mystery, and then it kind of just tells you what happened. So it wasn't very thrilling, which is okay. I still very much enjoyed the experience. It was more sad than anything, so just a heads up if you go into this book, especially if you are a parent. It is really, really sad in that aspect, but I still recommend. It's by Lisa Jewell. Did I say that? Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. I had read a previous Lisa Jewell book last year and really enjoyed the audiobook for that, so that's why I picked it up. It was literally the only audio in my library that was available at that time, so I just picked it up to listen to, and I enjoyed the experience even though it was sad. So that is all the books that I read for this month. I am very excited for February's TBR, which I posted last week. I'm excited to see how many books I can read this month. I have already finished one this month. It was just a short story, but it was a great time already, so I'm off to a good start. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what books you read in January as well in the comments, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.